You want really complex, you go to Answer to Job.
Yeah, that one's, I haven't read that one.
I would love to do that. I vote for that.
That one's like, what, 90 pages or something? It's not that long.
Yeah, let's see. Answer to Job. Yeah, it's not long, but it's really complex. I mean, we can take about a page a week. 108 pages.
Sounds good.
Well, the only paragraph that matters, or 3 paragraphs that matter, 752 to 754.
Alright, let's knock that one off in a hurry.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let me cut to the chase for you. I'm gonna read this to you. Now, I had an epiphany when I read this, because I could never get what religion was about. And I obviously I've been brought up as a young man in the late 20th century, so the scientific method and everything is very in the ascendance and so on. And I'm saying, what the heck is religion about? And I think a lot of people think that. I mean, and Jung was saying religion lost its numinosity. I guess it's 751 too. All right, 751. What most people overlook or seem unable to understand is the fact that I regard the psyche as real. They believe only in physical facts and must consequently come to the conclusion that either the uranium itself or the laboratory equipment created the atom bomb. That is no less absurd than the assumption that a non-real psyche is responsible for it. God is an obvious psychic and non-physical fact, i.e., a fact that can be established psychically but not physically. Equally, these people have still not got it into their heads that the psychology of religion falls into 2 categories, which must be sharply distinguished from one another. Firstly, the psychology of the religious person, and secondly, the psychology of religion proper, i.e., the religious contents. It is chiefly my experiences in the latter field which have given me the courage to enter into the discussion of the religious question, and especially into the pros and cons of the dogma of the Assumption, which, by the way, I consider to be the most important religious event since the Reformation. Now, the doctrine of the Assumption, which Pope Pius XII promulgated, was that the Virgin Mary entered into heaven with God. Okay, which he didn't do until 1950. So until 1950, the Virgin Mary was just another woman who had a baby. But in 1950, the Pope finally acknowledged that all the Catholics were running around saying, "Hail Mary, full of grace," and praying to the Virgin, right? And so in 1950, the Pope let the Virgin Mary become part of the trib, she sits up there with the Trinity, right? She's the 4th part of the Trinity, okay? Which, by the way, I consider to be the most important religious event since the Reformation. It is a petroscandale for the unpsychological mind. How can such an unfounded assertion as the bodily reception of the Virgin into heaven be put forward as worthy of belief? But the method which the Pope uses in order to demonstrate the truth of the dogma makes sense to the psychological mind, because it bases itself firstly on the necessary prefigurations and secondly on a tradition of religious assertions reaching back for more than 1,000 years. Clearly, the material evidence for the existence of this psychic phenomenon is more than sufficient. It does not matter at all that a physically impossible fact is asserted, because all religious assertions are physical impossibilities. That's what got me. All religious assertions are physical impossibilities. If they were not so, they would, as I said earlier, necessarily be treated in the textbooks of natural science. But religious statements, without exception, have to do with the reality of the psyche and not with the reality of the Physis. What outrages the Protestant standpoint in particular is the boundless approximation of the Depera to the Godhead, and in consequence the endangered supremacy of Christ, from which Protestantism will not budge. In sticking to this point, it has obviously failed to consider that its hymnology is full of references to heavenly bridegroom, who is now suddenly supposed to have a bride without equal rights, who is not to have a bride without equal rights, or has perchance the bridegroom in true psychologistic manner been understood as a mere metaphor. The logical consistency of the papal declaration cannot be surpassed. It leaves Protestantism with the odium of being nothing more than a men's religion, which allows no metaphysical representation of women. In this respect, it is similar to Mithraicism, and Mithraicism found this prejudice very much to its detriment. Protestantism has obviously not given sufficient attention to the signs of the times, which point to the equality of women. But this equality requires to be metaphysically anchored in the figure of a divine woman, the bride of Christ, just as the person of Christ cannot be replaced by an organization, so the bride cannot be replaced by the church. The feminine, like the masculine, demands an equally personal representation. The dogmatizing of the Assumption does not, however, according to the dogmatic view, mean that Mary has attained the status of a goddess, although as mistress of heaven, as opposed to the prince of the sublunary aerial realm, Satan, and mediatrix, she is functionally on par with Christ, the king and mediator. At any rate, her position satisfies the need of the archetype. The new dogma expresses a renewed hope for the fulfillment of that yearning for peace which stirs deep down in the soul, and for a resolution of the threatening tension between the opposites. Everyone shares this tension, and everyone experiences it in his individual form of unrest. The more so, the less he sees any possibility of getting rid of it by rational means. It is no wonder, therefore, that the hope, indeed the expectation of divine intervention, rises in the collective unconscious and at the same time in the masses. The papal declaration has given comforting expression to this yearning. How could Protestantism so completely miss the point? Well, it goes on, but those 2 pages sort of got me, okay, because especially these points, every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche, not a statement of the physis. And I regard the psyche as real, and God is an obvious psychic fact, not a physical fact, i.e., a fact that can be established psychically, but not physically.
Like you said, it's the psyche. There's nothing beyond that. And if you want to, the thing that always amazed me about religion was that there were no women. I mean, the women were always like handmaidens or something.
Right.
And that I didn't think was
What
too
church
bright.
were you talking about? Which church were you talking
Any of them, they're all male.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Well, not in
that's,
the Catholic Church.
well, you got
Mary has a very
yeah,
prominent
but you got
place.
a pope. Well, that's been a woman once, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But
Well-
even so, it's very male
Right.
dominated. It's also
The Catholic Church has all male priests.
yeah, and they're not going to let women. That's what the last guy said. The current pope said there won't be any women.
Well, that has nothing to do with the Godhead. That's the practitioner level.
Right. I mean, that's the part of religion which Jung envisioned when he was 11 that God dropped a turd on.
So I remember in the Eastern Orthodox faith, the bridegroom was married to the church. So Jesus was the bridegroom married to the church.
Right.
Very interesting, because that Eastern Orthodox is very rigid in terms of not changing over the hundreds of years. You know.
Right.
But see, that sounds so physical, and that was the big thing that got me. It's like my whole life was metaphor. That's why I say psyche, because I couldn't. To
So
me,
that is a metaphor. That's not.
to me, well, married to the church. Church didn't
It's
exist till
conceptual.
after he died. You know that he wasn't a Christian. Jesus wasn't a Christian.
He was a Jew.
Yeah, and you know Jung wasn't a Jungian.
Right.
Well,
And the Bible didn't get settled until 325 AD.
Yeah, Christianity didn't become Christianity until Paul, really.
No, long after that.
Well, I mean, he set up the main framework for it. I mean, before that, it was
Yeah, I guess, like-
vicarious atonement and all of that stuff
Right.
going on.
Yeah.
But I could never understand why they were so literal about everything. And that to me just blew my mind. It just seemed stupid to me as a kid that they would be so literal about Jesus and the virgin birth and the fishes and the wine and everything else. It was just like,
Yeah, well, what's this all about?
Why are
And of course the atheists
and they
dump
wanna prove
dump
it.
on Christians all the time by saying, you know, you're cannibals because you're eating the body and blood of Christ. Isn't that
But
cannibalism?
metaphorically, that's fine.
Metaphorically,
makes
it's
perfect
fine,
sense.
right? And historically,
Yeah.
that's what they did.
Yeah.
Humans, you know, would eat actually the flesh of their ancestors. I mean, that's what cannibals did. They ate.
Yours did mine.
Okay, so anyway, I've read to you the punchline of Answer to
Yeah,
Job.
well, I agree
That's
with
what
you.
that brought out.
So
Is that the one that has the line about belief versus knowing God?
you know that comes from a video.
From the video.
That was
I
a
saw the video.
video interview with the BBC.
Yeah, that was a matter of part, right?
Right.
Yeah, that was good. I just ordered that.
Right. It's a good video. But I mean, that was another aha moment for me. Okay, because when he said, "I have no need to believe, I know," suddenly I had an epiphany.
I've told a Christian that.
Pardon?
I've told a Christian that. And he said, don't you believe? And I said, I don't believe. You know.
Yeah. And
And it's true.
that's right.
It's
And
not a big deal. That's
It's
the
not
thing
a
that
big
amazes
deal.
me. They always
It's
act
like
like it's
knowing
such a
this
big
table,
lofty
right?
thing, and it's right here. You know,
It's like knowing this table.
you're in it.
right.
Yeah.
You're in it every day. Something's driving you. You know, I remember a little prayer that I used to say to myself when I was on my way to school on test days. Okay.
Sort of selective.
Right. No, but
Fair weather ones.
Okay, I'll believe to that.
you know, so I'll tell you my little prayer. My little prayer was, "Dear God, please give me the strength to do my best on this examination." Okay, and that was actually the right thing, because if there's a God, the God's here. It's in your heart, and so at that time I was thinking of it as up there somewhere, but it's actually here, and people don't understand that it's in their heart, right? And
Well, in a way, it's here because you know you're appealing to something higher in yourself. So
yeah, but it's here. It's not up there.
I know, but it's metaphorically.
Right. I mean,
It's the same
when the
sense.
football player crosses the goal line and goes, you know, points at the sky, you know, it's not up there, it's in here. You know, and
It's also
yes,
pretty damn arrogant.
I know. Like God sitting around
God
worrying
wanted
about
me to
your
do it.
getting your touchdown.
so Answer to Job is one choice.